So yesterday we briefly discussed comments made by Stacey Abrams, where she proposed a novel solution to our economic woes. As Abrams explained, all we need to do is just kill more children. And in case you missed that clip, well, here it is again.
You're running for governor of Georgia. I would assume, maybe incorrectly, but while abortion is an issue, it nowhere reaches the level of interest of voters in terms of the cost of gas, food, bread, milk, things like that. What could you do as governor to alleviate the concerns of Georgia voters about those livability, daily, hourly issues that they're confronted with?
But let's be clear. Having children is why you're worried about your price for gas. It's why you're concerned about how much food costs. For women, this is not a reductive issue. You can't divorce being forced to carry an unwanted pregnancy from the economic realities of having a child. And so it's important for us to have both and conversations. We don't have the luxury of reducing it or separating them out, but we also have to talk about what a governor can do. A governor can address housing prices. A governor can address the cost of education. A governor can put money into the pockets of everyday hardworking Georgians instead of giving tax cuts to the wealthy. That's what I talk about on the trail, and that's what's resonating. But let's not pretend that women, half the population, especially those of childbearing age, they understand that having a child is absolutely an economic issue.
Now, I called this a novel solution, but of course that isn't really true. There's nothing novel about it. The Democrat Party has always promoted abortion as a path to financial security, and the logic is simple. It's morally depraved, but simple. Kids cost money. Get rid of the kids. Get rid of the expense. Financial prosperity awaits, allegedly, even though it doesn't actually work out that way. This is the eugenic engine that has driven the pro-abortion movement since its inception. It's just that only recently have the pro-aborts started to once again be more open in their eugenicism advocacy. And I say once again because years ago, before the movement went through a series of rebrands and they started talking more about so-called reproductive health and all the rest of it, before that, the pro-abortion movement used to be much more direct and explicit about all of this and about the fact that it was advocating for eugenics. Back in 1969, the vice president of Planned Parenthood at the time, named Frederick Jaffe, at the request of an organization called the Population Council, produced a memo with a number of recommendations for how the government could control population growth. This is the Jaffe memo, as it's now called, and it outlines a series of strategies all falling under four broad categories. And those categories are social constraints, economic deterrence, social controls, and preventing unwanted pregnancy. So just to highlight a few here, and we put the memo up on screen so you can see it yourself, just a few. Jaffe suggested restructuring the family, encouraging people to postpone or avoid marriage. He coupled this with compulsory government education and an encouragement of increased homosexuality. He also recommended that women should work outside the home. Under the deterrent category, he listed a number of strategies, including the brilliant idea that the government could reduce population by fostering, quote, chronic depression. That's actually on the memo. Elsewhere in the memo, he recommends the wide distribution of contraception along with sterilization and, of course, tax-funded abortion. Now, some of his ideas, like compulsory abortion for out-of-wedlock pregnancies, that's one of the things that he advocated, that hasn't yet come to pass, but a great many of them have. In fact, all the rest of the ones that I just listed have. So the eugenicists, they told us exactly what they were going to do and why they were going to do it, and then they did it and are still doing it now. It took them several decades, but Planned Parenthood, they even found a way to implement their mass sterilization plan. Under the guise of gender affirmation, they now provide sterilization drugs to children. So that is yet another box on the Jaffe memo, which has been checked off. This was the dystopian future that Planned Parenthood predicted and advocated for and fought to establish, and now we're living in it. Actually, we're living in something far beyond it, we might say, because somewhat surprisingly, Frederick Jaffe never thought of, or at least didn't include in his memo, the idea of simply just killing off large numbers of adults and calling it a medical treatment. Put them down like dogs. Euthanasia did not factor into his calculations, not on the memo anyway. Perhaps he didn't have an imagination twisted enough to conjure up possibilities like that at the time. And yet, at some point in the years following, the eugenicists did arrive at this conclusion, and now the death merchants are rapidly expanding their war on human life. Last week, I told you about a report from a journalist named Rupa Subramanya who reveals the extent of the euthanasia regime in Canada, or the medical assistance in dying, as they call it there. She chronicles the plight of one distraught mother, you may recall, who's fighting to prevent her 23-year-old son from killing himself through euthanasia. Her son, like so many of the other doctor-assisted suicide, quote, patients in Canada, is not terminally ill. He's just depressed, and he no longer wants to live. Rather than provide him with mental and emotional counseling, his doctors are simply going to kill him. That's their way around it. Unless his mother can stop it, though, she has no real legal means of doing so. In fact, the euthanasia laws are expanding so much in Canada and are becoming so permissive that by early next year, they're expected to start killing minors without parental consent. Although, even if they did it with parental consent, that would be no less horrifying. So Rupa provides more details on just how pervasive this has become in the country. Reading now, she says, in 2017, the first full year in which MAID, which is medical assistance in dying, which is administered by provincial governments, was in operation, 2,838 people opted for assisted suicide, according to a government report. By 2021, that figure had jumped to 10,064, accounting for more than 3% of all deaths in Canada that year. There have been a total of 31,664 MAID deaths, and the large majority of those were people between the ages of 65 to 80 when they died. In 2017, only 34 MAID deaths were in the 18 to 45-year-old category. In 2018, that figure rose to at least 49. In 2019, it was 103. In 2020, it was 118. And in 2021, it was 139. Today, thousands of people who could live for many years are applying successfully to kill themselves. Indeed, in some Canadian provinces, nearly 5% of deaths are MAID deaths. 5%. In 2021, the province of Quebec reported that 4.7% of deaths in the province were due to MAID. In British Columbia, the number was 4.8%. Progressive Vancouver Island is officially, or rather unofficially, known as the assisted death capital of the world, according to doctors. Now, the other thing to understand is that those who apply for doctor-assisted suicide can have their applications accepted quickly. The process is streamlined. Now, what that means is that you'll have better luck in Canada getting accepted for euthanasia than you would for, say, getting a building permit to put an addition on your house. There's usually tons of red tape, and it takes forever to get approval from anything through the bureaucracy. And that's the case in Canada and the United States, of course. But if you want to kill yourself, they'll get you through that process quickly. The AP reported this a few months ago, quote, Alan Nichols had a history of depression and other medical issues, but none were life-threatening. When the 61-year-old Canadian was hospitalized in June 2019 over fears he might be suicidal, he asked his brother to bust him out as soon as possible. Within a month, Nichols submitted a request to be euthanized, and he was killed within a month. Submitted the request and was killed within a month, despite concerns raised by his family and a nurse practitioner. His application for euthanasia listed only one health condition as the reason for his request to die: hearing loss. Nichols' family reported the case to police and health authorities, arguing that he lacked the capacity to understand the process and was not suffering unbearably among the requirements for euthanasia. They say he was not taking needed medication, wasn't using the implant that helped him hear, and that hospital staffers improperly helped him request euthanasia. Now think about that for a second. He was sent to the doctor, he was sent to the hospital because he was suicidal, and his family thought the hospital would help save him from suicide. And instead, according to the family, the staff at the hospital helped him kill himself. They killed this man because he had hearing loss. They'll also kill you in Canada if you're homeless. City News has a report about a 54-year-old man named Amir Farsood in Ontario. He applied for medical assistance in dying and has already received one of the 2 doctor's letters of approval that he needs, all because he is potentially about to be homeless. Here's their report.
How would you describe the quality of your life?
Awful, non-existent, terrible. I do nothing other than sort of manage symptoms, manage pain. There we go.
Amir Farsood lives with never-ending agony from a back injury.
How bad does it get?
At worst, it gets bad enough that I'm crying like a 5-year-old and not sleeping for 2 days in a row.
But that's not why he has applied for medically assisted dying, otherwise known as MAID, nor is it the depression he lives with. Farsood has applied because he is in danger of losing his housing. He lives in this St. Catharines rooming house, sharing this space with 2 other people. But it is up for sale. Farsood lives on social assistance and says he can't find anywhere else he can afford.
I don't want to die, but I don't want to be homeless more than I don't want to die.
Medically assisted dying in Canada was expanded this past March to include people with disabilities or those suffering in pain, even if they are not close to death.
Now, the thing to remember about this is that it is not as though all of these people would have killed themselves anyway, and all Canada is doing is providing them a painless way of killing themselves. Now, if that were the case, it would still be horrifying. It would still be a horrifying reality. But it's not the case. You know, more people are killing themselves. People who would not have otherwise. People who would have fought on and continued living and found a way to keep living and to deal with their problems. Someone like this, for example. I mean, homelessness is a very real problem, and if you're going through that or being threatened with something like that, or you're worried about the possibility of that, to call it distressing, of course, would be an understatement. But you can live through it. You could fight through it. There's still hope. There's light at the end of the tunnel. And a great many of these people, they would, if they didn't have this system in place to just usher them off the planet, usher them out of their own lives, if that system wasn't in place, many of these people would continue living. So I think Stacey Abrams, when she sees that, she'd be proud. Because rather than make our country, more livable for children, Abrams suggests that we simply kill them. And in Canada, rather than address the homelessness problem, they'll just start exterminating them. Rather than address the problem of depression and despair and mental illness, just kill them all. They're not going to concern themselves with coming up with policies or strategies that may help human beings be happy and flourish. No, in fact, it's the opposite, because human flourishing is a negative in their minds. According to the powers that be, according to the leftists, human flourishing is a negative. It's the opposite of what they desire. Human flourishing, as the Jaff memo showed in 1969, is the problem that they seek to solve. And they have spent decades solving it. And that'll do it for this portion of the show. As we move over to the members block portion, hope to see you there. If not, talk to you tomorrow. Godspeed.